What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Dungeon Maker video. In today's guide, we're going to be taking a look at how to get to day 340 on any difficulty level. If you haven't done so already, feel free to check out my other two videos on Dungeon Maker. One of them introduces you to the game, as well as another one shows you how to get to day 100. This video specifically was made for more advanced players to give them a second opinion on how to approach day 340. Now, as a disclaimer with all of my guides, I want to let you guys know that I'm not the only source of information. If you need more help, I highly suggest you check out the very useful TouchArcade forums that I've gone ahead and linked in the video description. And of course, go ahead and find other people who make content for Dungeon Maker. I'm sure there are going to be a lot more of them as this game becomes more popular as time progresses. And that way you can go ahead and combine all of our information to go ahead and allow you to make the best informed decision for your particular playstyle. Now, keep in mind that I made this guide during build 10062. You can see that on the bottom left-hand corner. In the future, I know that Dungeon Maker will be updated with bug fixes and content updates. Whatever happens in the future, I want to say that the core principles of this guide should still remain the same. I don't think the game is going to change that dramatically, even if the meta may shift as time goes on. So with that lengthy introduction out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the meat and potatoes. Let's go ahead and show you the day 340 build. Alright guys, before we get started here, there are a couple of things I want to go ahead and lay down at the beginning of the video because there's a lot of information to go over. I was really troubled in making this guide because my core emphasis was to make it as accessible to as many players as possible. So I wanted to make a guide that was pretty easy to pick up, even if someone was at the base difficulty level. So what does that mean? Well, in Dungeon Maker, you should know by now, since I'm assuming you're an advanced player watching this video, that there are increasing difficulty levels from 1 to 10, I believe. And the more you increase the difficulty, the more modifiers the game will add to the enemy heroes. So I wanted to make a guide that was good from difficulty level 0, basically base level difficulty, all the way up to the hardest one at 10. And in order to do so, I had to figure out what was the absolute bare minimum needed to go ahead and get to day 340 on normal difficulty, and finally what you needed to get to day 340 at the absolute hardest. So trying to make that balancing act work in writing a guide can be a headache. So that was one of the biggest struggles that I went through, but I think I figured it out for the most part, and you'll see that in just a moment. But that being said, before we really dig into the guide, I made this little section right here for people who happen to stumble across the Google Sheet. Now, that being said, I have linked the Google Sheet on the video description, so you can access it at any time. It is updated in real time as well, so that means that if I happen to make any changes to it, as long as you save the link, you will always get the latest version of the guide. I also will go ahead and put a link over on my website, boxinacorner.net, for those of you who visit that site. And I suggest you do, because it is my own personal site, and I go ahead and play other games and talk about other stuff on that site, should you care. But that's not here or there. As I was writing this guide, I realized that there were some things that were too essential in order to get to day 340, and I decided to list this in a section of the guide called Pre-Requisites, and I've even highlighted it in red. Now, for those of you not used to Google Sheets, on the upper left-hand corner, you'll see these little tabs. They will actually go ahead and cycle through the different sections of the guide. Let's just go and walk through them real quickly. So the first tab is Pre-Requisites. The second tab is the actual plan itself, which I'll be talking in just a moment. The third tab is Fate Priority Selection. Fourth tab is Important Notes, and this is a very important tab because as you run through the guide, you're going to have questions, and this is kind of like a FAQ. I decided to write answers to questions you might have, but I'll talk about that when it comes. I also compiled all of the events in the game and added a picture just for ease of reference. If you're wondering what event you haven't hit yet in your run or what event you're looking for in your run, I went ahead and made this kind of reference sheet. Now, keep in mind, this was for version 10062. So as future versions come out, I'll update the events as needed. And then the last tab is just a friendly link to TouchArcade forums. I got a lot of my information from these forums, but not my only source of information. However, I find it to be the most well-structured and the most dare I say, intelligent discussion of the game. Other places tend to be a bunch of people spouting out either the game's too hard or they don't know what to do, or they have kind of awkward advice. But this one, everyone seems to know what they're doing. They have all their stuff together, and I really respect them for that. So please visit it. It's run by a nice guy named NyanPass, I should say. I'm not sure why I read that NyanPass. It's like a cat. And yeah, just go ahead and give him a friendly word or shout out if you stop by. Okay. So anyway, let's go back to the prerequisites, and let's go ahead and go through this top left list in bright red. So, in order to get to day 340, even on the most basic level, you are going to need a Dungeon Lord at level 10. This is non-negotiable. At level 10, your Dungeon Lord of choice is going to unlock all of her abilities. She's going to have a couple of units to start with her, and all of her abilities will synergize within her own skill tree. So that means that any effects, secondary effects that happen with her skills will be unlocked. If you have a Dungeon Lord below level 10, not all of these things will be true, and that will make your run a lot harder. Now, I can tell you that getting a Dungeon Lord to level 10 is not that hard. You can pretty much do 3 level 60 resets, or withdrawals, I should say. And that, for the most part, should get you, I think, to like level 5 or level 6 or 7. Then from there on, you can do an additional difficulty level and do a 100 run, and then go and reset, and that should get you to level 10. Okay, now I'm not sure the exact science of that number, but in other words, getting to 10 is really not that difficult if you increase the difficulty level. Okay, so that is the first prerequisite. It has to be level 10, whatever Dungeon Lord you are taking with you. The second requirement is at least 2 bodyguards, otherwise known as Dark Lord Guardian, unlocks from the game. In other words, from the Abyss store. Now, if you don't know what that looks like, I've put it on the bottom right-hand corner here. It says Add Dark Lord's Guardian. It's an ability unlock. The number of monsters you can deploy in the Dark Lord's room increases to 1. Now, in order to get to day 340 on the easiest level, you need at least 2 bodyguards. Okay? Later on, as the game gets harder because you increase the difficulty, you're going to need all 3 bodyguards. All right? So this is essential. I found out that the bodyguards are really the core to any day 340 run, because the first, I would say 140 days to maybe 160 days are really essential in a run. And that's when your Dungeon Lord is the most vulnerable. She doesn't have all of her levels yet. She doesn't have all of her rooms set up in the way she probably wants it to. And if heroes tend to breach the room, she's in a lot of trouble. You need someone to go ahead and buy time for her and to fight enemies off. If she's just there by herself, she's probably going to die 100%, because if heroes reach her room, they usually come in flocks. It's rare that you get a errant straggler. Okay, so like I said, 2 bodyguards are required to get to a day 340 run at the easiest difficulty level, bare minimum. 3 is, of course, better. Which moves on to my next point. Bodyguards must have the Mystic 1, it's an S rank, skill or ability. So what does this mean? If you haven't seen Mystic 1 yet, what it translates to is that it allows a monster to shrug off any type of negative debuff. So why is this important? I was reading on forums, as well as even on my own YouTube channel, someone had mentioned that at day 120, they had suddenly died and they had no idea what was going on. Now, this was a clear example of me seeing someone else that didn't understand the mechanics of the game. I have gotten to day 340 a lot of times already with particular builds that I have made, and it was my own fault for not making this clear in my other guide. But then again, my other guide was a day 100 guide, so I'm going to make it clear now in this day 340 run. When your bodyguards are under the influence of charm, or specifically haze, they will attack a friendly unit or a random unit, which also includes a friendly unit. So what does this mean? This means that if your bodyguards are under the effect of haze, they're either going to attack one another, or more than likely they're going to attack the Dungeon Lord themselves. And most guides out there, including my own, suggest that you have the best and strongest units as your bodyguard. So this easily translates to what I'm about to say, and you're pretty much picking up what I'm putting down. If you have 3 bodyguards under charm or haze, they are all going to smack the tits right in her boobies, your Dungeon Lord, so hard that she's going to be like a bowl of jello in an earthquake. Okay, she's just going to jiggle around. She's going to have those swirly eyes you see in like animes and stuff like that. She's not going to know what hit her, and she's probably going to die. And this is very apparent on day 120. And why is that? Why does your Dungeon Lord suddenly die out of nowhere? That is the reason. Is because your bodyguards were under the effect of some type of debuff in which they hit each other or they hit a friendly unit, namely your Dungeon Lord. So it's very important that you have the Mystic 1S ability on whatever bodyguards you choose to bring into your Dungeon Lord room, in that way they will be immune to any negative status effect. And this is good across the board. Mystic 1 is an excellent skill to have on both the Dungeon Lord, on your bodyguard, or any monster, because it prohibits a negative status effect of happening on them, and those can be run ending, because some effects are pretty nasty, like Haze and Charm. Okay, so that is that. Moving on to the next point, familiarity with game mechanics. You're not guessing. Once again, if you are looking at this guide for the very first time and you just picked up Dungeon Maker 2 or 3 days ago, this kind of moves right on to my next point. If you can't beat day 200 on any difficulty, this guide is not for you. I am going to go very fast in this guide because there's a lot to cover. But secondly, I assume that you understand the mechanics of this game. I assume you understand how attack and defense works. I assume you understand when I bring up an ability, you know what that ability does right off the get-go. If I talk about a relic, you know what that is. If I talk about plan placement and day optimization, you know what those are. This is stuff that you have engraved in your head by playing the game and dying so many times. You now know what I'm talking about, okay? So if you're not familiar with the game mechanics and you're randomly guessing what to put down, you're thinking to yourself, this might be good, even though I have no idea what it does really. Unfortunately, this guide is not for you, okay? So you will not get to day 340 even if you follow it. If you copy paste it, it's not going to work out. That's just the reality of the situation. I'm not saying that to be mean or negative or, you know, trying to put you down or anything like that. It's just feel free to look at my earlier guides. Feel free to go to the TouchArcade forums. Remember, for more help, visit these guys right there. There we go. Ask questions, get familiar with the game, and then when you're ready to make that leap to day 340, feel free to come back and refer to this guide in which I just talk about these mechanics. Okay. Now, moving forward, if you're already at day 340 and you're looking for a second opinion, which, like I said, I try to present my guide as a well-structured second opinion. Okay, it's not the end guide. This is not the cheater's guide to beating the game 100%. If you're looking for a second opinion and you want to beat up to day 340 on a higher difficulty level, these are the core Abyss Store unlocks that I would recommend right off the get-go if you have a couple of Rebirth Stones to spend. Okay, so the first one is going to be Monster Succession Up. That's right here. This allows you to carry over very specific bodyguards. So in previous runs, you're probably going to have access to some pretty strong units. Having Monster Succession will allow you to start the run with these bodyguards. And 6-star monsters, which I believe is that bright blue star monster symbol, these type of monsters have a lot of useful SS abilities. So carrying them over to a new run is very beneficial. The next Abyss Store unlock I would recommend is called the Max Skill Slot with Monster Succession Up. That's quite a nameful, and you can see that icon right here. What this does is that every time you bring over a monster, you can actually add another skill to it, because by default it has 2 skills. If you have this ability unlocked, you can give it 3 additional skills, which is tremendous. This turns bodyguards from great units into master units, meaning that they'll have 5 abilities on them, all abilities of your choosing, and they're basically going to be really super powerful units. And if you can carry over 4 monsters, then you're going to have 3 really buff bodyguard units, and you're going to have 1 really strong units right off from the get-go, which is going to help your higher difficulty day 340 runs start off a lot better. Okay. Now, Facility Succession Up is the next thing that I recommend. This allows quicker starts. Whatever facility you bring over is up to you. I personally like bringing in lounges because I like my monsters to be stronger right from the get-go. It allows them to survive longer. It gives me more time to plan out my dungeon. But whatever you bring over is up to you. Some of you out there may make really strong facilities. I think Warhorn is one of the more popular ones. And you might want to bring them over to a additional run or a next run. If you want to do that, go ahead. But in order to do that, you're going to need this ability Facility Succession Up. So feel free to get it when it pops up. Okay. And the next one is a little bit, I would say, not that important, but having dungeon expansion right from the get-go will give you 3 additional tiles, which will allow you 12 right from the start. And I just like to have this right from the get-go because it makes life that much easier. It's just so much faster. to go and plan your dungeon correctly than working with the original 9 tiles when you start off the game, okay? Especially if you're doing a day 340 run where the early days are really essential in getting things up and running, okay? You don't necessarily have to pick this. I mean, if the other 3 show up first, grab those immediately. They're way more important than the dungeon expansion. But if you have room for it, grab it, okay? And the final thing is really more of a recommendation for a day 340 run. I want to go and stress the point that we're trying to get to day 340. We are not trying to get other achievements. There are certain little achievements in the game that are kind of cute, like stack 1000 Fury on a character. I think it was like get 15 traps in the dungeon, summon like 50 monsters or 45 monsters. I forgot the number off the top of my head. Those are cute little achievements, but what we're trying to do with this guide is get to day 340, okay? Do not try to mix and match achievements. We're just trying to survive the day 340 and beat that difficulty level so we can move on to the next one and get that final achievement. In order to do so, I personally found, as of build 10062, that's the one that I made this guide on, Tanya, Floria, and Marielle are pretty much the current meta min-max lords, meaning that if you decide to use these lords, you are going to have a lot easier of a time getting through to day 340, whether or not you use my guide or someone else's guide, because these dungeon lords are just better suited toward the game's mechanics, okay? Tanya's 4-star mana ability is insanely strong. Floria's 4-star mana ability is insanely strong. And Mario can stack debuffs with the right trap setup like crazy, right? To the point where you're like, whoa, I never knew traps could be this cool. Even if you're doing a later dungeon run with a higher difficulty level, because heroes do get an innate ability to dodge traps. It doesn't matter. Mario doesn't care because she applies debuffs directly. All right, so these dungeon lords in particular are really strong. And if you're doing a day 340 run, I highly suggest you use them, okay? And that will make your life so much easier. All right, guys, it's time to begin trying to explain this massive eyesore you see in front of us right now. This is my day 340 flexible plan for any difficulty level of Dungeon Maker. And I keep in mind, I made this plan while I was playing version 10062 of the game, okay? All right, so where do we begin? Let's go ahead and start on the left-hand side, and then I'll go ahead and move slowly to the right-hand side where the entrance of the dungeon is. Now, for your convenience, I have color-coded different tiles in the plan with references at the bottom, which also match their color coding. So that way, when you're deciding on a floor plan of your own, you don't necessarily have to follow my plan. You can go ahead and remember these useful little points. So that way you can strategize a little bit better. So let's start off on the left with the Dungeon Lord room. Now, remember in my Pre-Requisites section of this guide, I talked about having a minimum of 2 bodyguards. 3 is better. They all must have the Mystic 1S ability for the aforementioned reason. While I was making this floor plan and doing my test runs for day 340 on different difficulties, I was wondering why my Dungeon Lord was suffering from SDLDS. And what does that stand for? Sudden Dungeon Lord Death Syndrome. Okay? Out of nowhere, my Dungeon Lord would drop dead. The run would end, and I would sit there and blink and go, what in the world happened? I did everything right. I checked out every single box that I had listed in my plan. I crossed my T's, I dotted my I's, and yet my Dungeon Lord is dead. She's gone. She's gone from this plane. And why did this happen? It happened because her bodyguards killed her. They backstabbed her. They did a Judas on her. And the reason that happened is because they were under the effects of haze. This is particularly nasty on day 120. On day 120 of your run, all monsters in your dungeon will inherit plus 10 haze, and that means that they will all hit random units whenever they are engaged in battle. They'll either hit the enemy, or they'll hit themselves, or they'll hit an ally. So my bodyguards killing my dungeon lords in my test runs, what was going on, and that's why I emphasize that your bodyguards must have Mystic 1S. This is above all else, okay? Now, can you go ahead and work around this? Yes, you can. If you are approaching day 120 and you know that this nasty day is going to come up, you can go ahead and try to remove your bodyguards from the Dungeon Lord room and kind of leave her alone and move them somewhere else, or even keep them on the bench in your roster. Now, although this is a trick on working around getting killed instantaneously on day 120 or suffering SDLDS out of nowhere, heroes may also cast spells or effects or abilities that make your monsters confused at any time. Okay, so it's better to just go ahead and take Mystic 1. It's a damn good ability anyway. You want to have it on your bodyguards. You want to also have it on your Dungeon Lord. And I think it'll make your run a lot easier if your bodyguards aren't under the influence of some type of negative effect. Okay, so that is that with those little 3 boxes under there that says bodyguard with Mystic 1. It's an S rank skill. Okay, now moving on to my color-coded point right here. Heroes will never leave the Dungeon Lord room once they enter. Whether it be 1 hero, whether it be 20 heroes, it does not matter. Once they enter the Dungeon Lord room, they will not leave, period. Your job is to prevent that many heroes from entering the Dungeon Lord room at once. The more they stack, the more they become dangerous, because any abilities the heroes have that affect other allies in the same room will go ahead and fire off. Like if you have a paladin or a knight that has an ability that gives all allies 2 shield or 1 shield, etc., stuff like that, or a defense boost. If you have 20 heroes in that same room, well, guess what? That paladin's going to buff all 20 heroes, and that's going to make your life a lot harder. Okay, so do whatever you need to do to minimize the amount of heroes at any time in your Dungeon Lord room. Don't let them stack. I already talked about this point, about 2 to 3 bodyguards. They should have Mystic 1S ability. But I also want to talk about what skills they should inherit. Now, what skills you choose are up to you, but obviously the game has already pre-ranked them from C, I believe, all the way up to SS rank. The higher rank abilities you have, the better, but not all of them are equal. Some A rank abilities are better than S rank, and some S rank abilities are better than even SS rank, and not all SS rank abilities are equal as well. Okay, it's your choice to decide what you want to bring over. Go ahead and use Fate cards that are Fortune Teller cards to go ahead and apply the abilities that you want to your particular monster or Dungeon Lord. I will say that having the monster succession that I talked about in the Pre-Requisite will help eliminate the need for you to do this every single run. So the better the skill, the easier your run is going to be. Pretty self-explanatory. Let's go and move on to our last point, which is about Floria or Tanya, who I recommend for easier runs overall. Now remember that this is a day 340 run. I'm not trying to get you to the leaderboard. I'm not trying to make a plan where you can go ahead and record a YouTube video and show everyone how elite and badass you are because you made it to day 8,000. Okay? That's not the intent of my plan. My plan is to allow you to survive the day 340 on any difficulty level and allow you to unlock the final achievements in the game, because I would say difficulty level 10, day 340, is the last logical achievement anyone is going to get in this game. And once you get that, you're done with your achievements. You've gotten all the free Abyss Stones, and you're pretty much done for the game until new content comes out. Okay, so this is what this plan is made for. It is not a min-maxer plan for surviving the longest. Okay, that's not what this plan is for. So that being said, since you're not going after any other achievement and you're not trying to do anything else other than survive to day 340, Floria or Tanya are the recommended Dungeon Lords because they are insanely overpowered in the current meta of the game, at least for build 10062 or version 10062, however you see it. Floria's 4-star mana ability of regeneration, healing all the units based on stacks of regeneration, is insane because it stacks with itself and it stacks repeatedly. So that means that you can keep firing it off and the units will heal as many regeneration stacks as they have on them. I've gotten as high as like 5,000 per hit. So they will always pretty much survive, and this will allow you to be a little bit more loose on your floor plan. With a Floria build, you can pretty much go with 6 facility rooms. You can go with a lot of traps. You don't need that many battle rooms because your monsters are virtually invincible. Okay, and that's why I would recommend Floria for a particular day 340 run. Tanya, on the other hand, is a beast because her 4-star mana ability, I believe, gives 3 acceleration and 3 fury off the top of my head. And what's even nice about that is that she doesn't even have a prerequisite for that ability. With Floria's regeneration, I believe it only affects monsters that are engaged in battle, although I could be wrong on that. But Tanya's ability works regardless of the situation. So every time you activate it, it applies to all of your monsters in the dungeon. So you can stack like 20 acceleration or fury on a monster just by spamming that ability. And the moment a hero enters that room, it's like a kill zone. All right, your monsters just like go hyper and do a lot of damage, and also do all of their abilities at once. So that's why I recommend Floria or Tanya. They just make your life that much easier, with the exception of Mario. Mario is a tricky dungeon lord, but she can also be pretty devastating if you set up the dungeon right, because she does focus a little bit more on traps. Her skills are a little bit more unique. I would definitely say she's the most unique of all of the dungeon lords. Her synergy is very strange, but if you get it right, it's also pretty cool. And it's very fun. I would say she's definitely the funnest dungeon lord to play, because she makes you think a lot. But regardless of the fact, if you're using Floria, Tanya, or Mario, you're going to have a lot easier time than using the other 4 dungeon lords, even though Rebecca and Emma are pretty damn good themselves. They just require specific setups. And Elizabeth and Lilith, poor Elizabeth and Lilith, I should say, are your starting dungeon lords. They need a lot of love. I hope they get buffed in the future. But if you're going to be using them, you better focus on battle rooms, because they need a lot of help. They need a lot of buffer. All right, so that is that for the yellow stuff in this floor plan. Let's go ahead and move on to the green stuff, which are the battle rooms, starting with the 9 tiles in front of the dungeon lord room. Okay, now on the bottom, you notice I put pickaxe as soon as possible, pickaxe day less or equal to 80, pickaxe day less or equal to 40. On the right hand side, I'll go and highlight this in editing. These are your starting 9 tiles if you have no dungeon expansions. On the left hand side, where the pickaxes are listed, these are the 9 tiles that you can expand your dungeon to once you get the appropriate pickaxe unlock. Now, pickaxe less than or equal to 40 means that before day 40, you want to go ahead and unlock these 3 tiles. The same thing goes with the 80, and then finally as soon as possible. The reason why I put as soon as possible for the last 3 tile unlock is because this pickaxe is not guaranteed. I have gotten it as late as day 220. I have gotten it as early as day 40, because I have the unlock for a dungeon expansion already. And then on day 20, I got a pickaxe. Day 40, I got a pickaxe. Boom. I've expanded my dungeon. I'm done. I no longer have to worry about pickaxes. I can lay out the dungeon in the way that I see fit in an efficient manner. Okay, so the moral of the story is it's up to you when to get your pickaxes, but I would recommend expanding your dungeon before day 40 first, and then I would recommend secondarily expanding your dungeon before day 80. And after that, your third pickaxe is up to you, but I would recommend getting it as soon as possible. That's what those 3 little purple tiles mean. Moving on to the top purple tiles, about weakest to strongest. This is in regards to your monsters. It's more logical to put the weakest monsters in the back of your dungeon near your dungeon lord, for the very reason is that in this particular day 340 plan, you're probably going to have a lot of traps in the front. And if you do happen to have a lot of traps in the front, they're going to affect the heroes that come into the dungeon. So by the time they reach the back of the dungeon, they're either going to be fighting other monsters, or they're going to have run over traps a few times, which puts them in a weakened state. So they're either going to have less HP, less stats overall, or under some type of debuff effect. And it is because of this, your weaker monsters should be able to pick off these heroes. Okay? The monsters in the front, however, are going to take the brunt of the heroes coming into the dungeon. So you want them nice and healthy and strong to go ahead and take fresh heroes. These heroes are going to come in. They haven't used any of their abilities. They haven't used any other buffs as of yet. So they're going to come in firing full pistons, and you want your strong monsters to go ahead and beat them to go toe-to-toe. You don't want to put your weak monsters in front. They're going to get killed. You might not heal them in time, or etc. So that's why I put weakest in the back, strongest in the front. And that's how that works out. Now moving on to battle rooms themselves, let's go and talk about the points that I referenced in the list here. The first thing is that heroes will never turn 180 degrees after entering an occupied battle room. All this means is that when a hero enters an occupied battle room, they have a tendency to skip to the next room. They're not going to go backwards. This isn't always the case, but it's like 90% of the time that I've observed it. I've observed it in slow motion. And whenever they're entering a battle room and there are other heroes fighting and it's full, they're going to go ahead and charge into the next room that is empty. That's a battle room. Okay, in other words, they want to fight, so they're going to go into the next room that has monsters in it, and then they're going to go ahead and start fighting. Rarely do they go backwards. So go ahead and keep that in mind. Don't haphazardly put battle rooms and then like a trap room behind it thinking, okay, well, you know, if this room is full, the hero's going to run back, get a debuff, and then come back into it. It doesn't work that way. It never works that way. They're going to charge into the next room for a fight. Moving on to the next point, Gigantify is an excellent battle room since it virtually ensures monsters will never die and vacate the room. This is true to some extent because later on you'll notice that in certain battles your monsters will die and they'll vacate the room, causing it to turn into an empty battle room, which is a liability, right? Gigantify is such a good battle room overall because it gives your monsters so much life. It only takes a few levels and one enhance to get up to like level 10x life, 3x attack, I believe is the modifier. And at that point in time, your monster is essentially invincible. So having Gigantify is really good in general, acting as a bulwark between your Dungeon Lord and heroes. I recommend you pick up Gigantify whenever possible. And if you're really fancy, go ahead and do the triple Gigantify room if you haven't unlocked. That is pretty much a room that is never ever going to die. As a matter of fact, I think triple Gigantify is overkill in my personal opinion. But hey, if you can use it, more power to you. And then finally, you want a minimum of 9 battle rooms in your dungeon, regardless of however your layout is planned, because I found that 9 battle rooms is enough to occupy 27 heroes at one time. If your Dungeon Lord has really buff bodyguards and your Dungeon Lord herself is really strong, 9 battle rooms is more than enough. However, if your Dungeon Lord is on the weaker side or she doesn't have a lot of direct damage abilities or abilities that stave off enemies, etc., stuff like that, you're going to get overwhelmed pretty quickly even with 9 battle rooms, okay? So regardless of whatever you do, I would say that 9 is the good number. Put them however you see fit. If you're heavily focused on facilities and traps, you want your battle rooms near your Dungeon Lord, but you always want a combination of 9 in some way, shape, or form, okay? So that's my point. And that is that with regards to battle rooms, pickaxe expansion, and monsters. So give me a moment here to catch my breath, and then I'm going to go ahead and edit and fade into the next portion of this discussion. All right, everyone, I took a moment to catch my breath, took a sip of some hot tea with honey in it to go ahead and rest my vocal cords, because I am going to begin again talking about this particular floor plan layout, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the trap rooms and what they are all about. Now, on the right-hand side, the initial 9 tiles of the dungeon, or the starting 9 tiles of your dungeon, I have made them as flexible as possible depending on the Dungeon Lord of your choice. If you have a Dungeon Lord that can fight, obviously go ahead and populate these with facility and trap rooms. If you have a Dungeon Lord that's rather weak, you want to go ahead and use at least 6 of them as battle rooms. However, I'm going to go and reference the first 3 tiles right here. I'll go ahead and highlight that in editing, why they should not be battle rooms. Now, the first room in front of your entrance is the quote-unquote 100% hit trap room. This room usually hits all heroes that enter the dungeon for the very first time, okay? Some heroes do have an ability to go ahead and dodge traps, and you'll see a big fat evade pop up from under their feet when that happens. Don't be discouraged. This is more the exception than the rule. Those heroes will not be hit by traps, but regardless of the circumstances, you always want this room as a trap room. There's no reason for you to put this as a battle room if you can go ahead and negatively affect all of the heroes that enter. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that all heroes receive the negative debuff effects of a battle room the moment they enter, regardless if they skip it. So yes, you can put a panic room here. Yes, you can put a like a weak or a slow room here. That's also a battle room, but it's not going to be as good as a negative debuff room that's specifically focused on just being a trap. All right, so that's that. Now, on the top and the bottom of this room, you can go ahead and make it either a trap or facility room. The reason why I put facility rooms here, and it's somewhat of an awkward choice, is that some folks do not have the automatic dungeon expansion at the beginning, but they might have facility succession. If you are one of those folks, you're going to wonder, where should I dump my facility rooms at the beginning of the run? I recommend putting them on top and bottom of the 100% trap room, because on the rear side of the initial 9 tiles you start off with, you really kind of want these to be battle rooms to go ahead and guard your Dungeon Lord from accidents or some pretty nasty RNG that happens to happen from time to time. You want them to be battle rooms to go ahead and stall off the heroes from entering the Dungeon Lord room, and I don't think it's wise to put your facilities right there and only having one room right here, which will ultimately be your last stand room before they enter the Dungeon Lord's room. Okay, so why take the chance? Go ahead and put the 2 facilities that you carried over on the top and bottom of the 100% trap room at the beginning, and that's that. Now for the rest of the rooms, if you're playing Mario or whatever Dungeon Lord where you want to use a lot of traps, um, go ahead and use these initial 9 tiles, and these initial 9 tiles only. Never put traps on the rear 9 tiles of the dungeon. And why is this? Remember that you want to go ahead and debuff heroes that enter the dungeon immediately and as quickly as possible to get them weak before they enter the rear section of your dungeon, because they're entering fresh. They're entering on a fresh pair of legs. They have maximum health and they haven't fired any of their cooldowns yet. Because of these facts, you want to go ahead and hit them with as many traps as possible before they engage your monsters. If you put traps at the back of your dungeon, this is counterintuitive. They're going to come into the dungeon fighting off your monsters on full health with full abilities, and then after they take a damage and they're already relatively weakened, you're then going to hit them with traps, which further weakens them. I mean, yes, you might kill some of them off with some damage traps, but it doesn't really make any logical sense because they're already debuffed. You're not going to debuff them further to fight stronger monsters. Okay, it doesn't really follow a line level of logic that's going to be efficient in the long run. If you're going to be min-maxing, you want to hit the heroes when they're fresh on their feet. Go ahead and give them a debuff. So that way, for example, a hero right out of the gate hit with a blind or a weak debuff effect, you know what? They're not going to hit your monsters that hard, okay? And your monsters in the front are always going to be fighting. Maybe they're low on life. Maybe they're struggling with the defense, okay? Hitting them with debuff right from the get-go means that their survivability is going to go up, rather than allowing them to die and then the heroes running forward and then hitting traps for no random reason. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. So always put your trap rooms in the front. And I would say a maximum of 9 is, even for a Mario user, a little bit overkill. You really should need more than 9 traps in any plan that's going to only focus on day 340. So let's go ahead and move on to facilities. Now with facilities, depending on the Dungeon Lord of your choice, you're only going to need 4 to 6 of them. If you're doing a 4 facility run, I suggest using these rooms in the back right here because these are very safe. If you play your cards right and your monsters are correctly leveled and everything is done so in a way that is efficient, these rooms aren't really going to see much action anyway. So go ahead and dump your facility rooms there, and that's that. If you want to go ahead and use 6 facilities, like I said earlier, use the 2 front near the entrance because these rooms shouldn't be used as battle rooms. And at the start of the game, you may not have space to dump your facility rooms anywhere else. You might as well keep leaving them there. The facility rooms that I recommend is hatchery and lounge. Reasons being is they're easy to get. You don't need any special unlocks to get these particular facilities. And hatcheries will fully leveled up, probably by day 200, I would say, will give you an additional 30-ish levels to your monsters. And lounges will give an additional 20 to 30 attack and defense, I believe, for all of your monsters. In a day 340 run, I found that you only need 2 of either facility. So if you're doing a 4 facility run, 2 hatcheries, 2 lounges, you're good to go. Okay. If you're doing a 6 facility run, you can use 2 more facilities as traps. Maybe you're playing as Mario. Or you can go really crazy and maybe add a 3rd hatchery and a 3rd facility and make your units even that much stronger when you pop them out, okay? That is really up to you. But like I said, for a D340 run, you really only need 2 of each facility. And that is that. So let's go ahead and move on to the final part of this dungeon plan, which is the right-hand side. And I've listed 2 things that I will highlight in editing. One is priority order and the other is merchant. For the priority order, these are the rewards that you get from doing an elite battle or a regular battle. I've made a priority list for those of you that might be a little bit lost on what to get after you finish a battle. Now, the first priority should be a facility of your choice. Facility rooms are rare. They are rarer than battle rooms and trap rooms. So when you find one that you want, always grab it first and foremost. Do not pick anything else regardless of how tempting it happens to be. So if you see a hatchery, you see a lounge, or you see a trap enhancing room or what have you, whatever you need, grab it. Don't think twice. And that's why I put it number 1 on the list of priority. Number 2 is battle room of choice. Certain battle rooms are extremely better than others. Gigantify, and I believe the other room, which I forgot, Sloth. I believe that gives like vulnerable and slow. I could be wrong. Or vulnerable and weakness. I don't remember the 2. But these battle rooms are heads and shoulders better than other battle room types that you can find. So if you happen to see these, grab them right away. Okay, and even if it isn't your battle room of choice, go ahead and grab them anyway to start populating your dungeon. You can always swap them out later. You need to start putting monsters on the ground to go ahead and start fighting those heroes. Okay, you don't want your dungeon lord fighting every single day too much because it will wear her down. Your third priority is a trap room of choice. Depending on how heavy traps are of importance in your run, you want to go ahead and put them down as you see fit. And of course, like battle rooms, certain trap rooms are way better than others. But I put them third on the list because they shouldn't take precedence over your battle rooms and your facilities, because those are much rarer and harder to come by. Traps are kind of hit and miss. You only need 1 or 2 of them depending on your run, so that's why they're third on the list. When those choices are not available and you have something like Enhance the Dungeon Lord or Combine Monsters or a Monster Egg, go ahead and take the Monster Egg, because having monsters waiting in your roster or populating your dungeon should be of priority for obvious reasons. You do need monsters to fight for you after all, so go ahead and start populating your dungeon. And if you have an excess of monsters, don't worry about it. You can always use the excess monsters later on for either combining recipes or enhancing your Dungeon Lord. So feel free to fill up your bench with additional monsters. And finally, 5-star equipment. All 5-star equipment in the game is pretty darn strong. They have a lot of useful modifiers, and I always take them when I see them if I don't have a monster egg choice or a room of choice. And sometimes I'll even take them over a monster egg because some of their abilities are really good. I think the shield that gives taunt and the cape that gives vampire are really good to grab always, especially one for your dungeon lord and one for a bodyguard. So be on the lookout for that 5-star equipment. There you go. Now moving on to this little merchant list right here. You notice I put a little parentheses, day greater or equal to 100. I've mentioned this many times over and over again in my previous guide. I'll mention it here as well. The longer you can stall off your merchant, the better your returns will be, because the higher the merchant with regards to the day that you're at, the better effects you're going to get. In other words, your combining monsters are going to be stronger because your monsters are naturally higher level. If you happen to buy eggs for the merchant, the monsters will be of a better rank. And if you're going to be buying construction, which is the first thing that I recommend, which is rooms, it also happens to be the cheapest thing at the merchant, those things are going to come out stronger. So in other words, they're going to come out at higher levels, and they're going to come out with a better variety. So the longer you can hold off the merchant, the better. And you really shouldn't be using a merchant until day 100. At least that's in my personal opinion for a day 340 run. If you need to use it earlier than that, feel free to do so, but I think it's kind of a waste. After construction, you should be buying monsters to go ahead and either fill out your dungeon or enhancing your dungeon lord. And that's the third option right there, enhance. Your dungeon lord really should be within 1/2 a level of your current day progression. I put this in the notes, in the important notes guide, but I'll go and talk about it here. In other words, by day 100, try to keep your dungeon lord at level 50. By day 200, try to keep your dungeon lord at level 100 or better. The reason being is that sometimes your dungeon lord has to fight. You want to make sure she's healthy enough to survive, so she needs higher stats, she needs better HP. Also, some dungeon lords scale off of level, meaning that their abilities will be better depending on the level of the dungeon lord. If this is the case, then enhancing your dungeon lord should take priority over getting more monster eggs or even construction, because the higher level your dungeon lord, the better her abilities will be. You don't want to neglect that. Okay, and that is that, guys, for the day 340 flexible plan. The last thing that I will mention is at the very bottom right here. Once you hit day 321, play it safe and skip as many days as you can. Planning at this point is out the window. When you hit day 321, skip, and skip. Play it safe. Sleep often. Hit a merchant. Go ahead and leave the merchant. Hit an event. Ignore the event. Do whatever you need to hit day 339, because once you do so, you're done with the run. You no longer need to micromanage your dungeon. Okay, so that's the last point I will go ahead and say. This is really a plan to get you to day 340, but in reality, it's a plan to kind of get you almost to day 321, if that makes any sense. Okay. And that is that. We'll go ahead and end this segment, and I'll meet you guys next in the Fate priority list. All right, everyone, I have labeled this section of the guide Fate Selection Priorities. I am going to go through this part of the guide really quickly because it is pretty self-explanatory, and I already expect anyone reading this guide to understand the core mechanics of the game. I just want to go ahead and reassure you that if you were thinking about doing these things at a certain part of your run, I'm just giving a secondary opinion that yes, you are not alone, and I'm thinking the same way. All right, so that's how that plays out. So before day 200, let's go ahead and start with this list. You want to go ahead and prioritize elite battles because obviously every time you fight an elite battle, they give a little bit more experience for your monsters as well as your dungeon lord, and they also give a relic reward as a guaranteed at the end of the battle. So before day 200, farm as many relics as possible. They will help your run proceed quicker and easier as you collect them. And that being said, some dungeon lords have specific relics custom made for them and their abilities. If you happen to get them early in the run, it really will allow you to kind of sit back and relax and not sweat too much as the days go on by. Move on to the next point, treasure chests. This is really self-explanatory. Treasure chests give the same rewards as elite battles, but you don't have to fight. So whenever you see them, grab them. It's a win-win situation. The third priority is battles. Now, battles are your bread and butter. Before day 200 and after day 200, regardless of whatever you're doing, you always want to go ahead and hit up battles. Why so? Battles always give monsters experience as well as your dungeon lord. Battles always give a reward in the form of gold and a random card. And finally, battles help flesh out your dungeon plan. You cannot flesh out your plan if you're going to be skipping days constantly. So remember that getting to day 340 shouldn't necessarily be that difficult. It really should be more a test of your patience. Getting to day 340 really should be quite easy once you understand the mechanics of the game and you're doing it over and over and over again. However, getting there requires due diligence, and in order to be diligent, you have to grind out the battles and get those rewards, get those monsters, get those rooms, get those eggs, all of that stuff. So please don't ignore battles. Don't skip them. Whenever you see them, just fight. Do what you got to do, and that's that. Our fourth priority before day 200 are dungeon cards. You're not really going to have that many things you need to enhance before day 200, nor should it matter. However, if you are going to hit up dungeon cards, you always want to hit up your upgrades for your facilities first, followed by your rooms. Your monsters should be able to take care of themselves. And remember, if you upgrade one monster, it's only really going to affect that singular monster. Whereas you upgrade a room, it's going to affect all the monsters in that room. And if you upgrade a facility, it's going to upgrade your entire dungeon. So that's that. Events are fifth in the list and not very popular because they have wild modifiers, and if you do not have the observing eye relic from the start or early on, you can fight an elite battle which is not going to give you a relic as a reward. I have listed all of the events in this tab right here, so feel free to click it and check all the events in the game as of build 10062. You can go and use that reference sheet to see what events you've already hit and what events you have not yet hit, to go ahead and see if you want to go ahead and access that event for any particular reward. That being said, if you're playing on difficulty, I believe it's 6 or higher, events do actually go a little bit higher on the list. I would swap dungeon with event because you are forced to take 2 altars from the get-go due to the difficulty choice. So if that's the case, you want to go ahead and hit up events a little bit sooner, so that way you can either find that event that gives you a golden hammer where you have to destroy a room and get 200 gold. You can actually destroy an altar using that event, or you want to go ahead and find the event with a goblin in it, because the goblin will either randomly destroy the room, randomly convert a room, or upgrade a room of your choosing. Okay, so that's where events would take priority over dungeon. And then finally, before day 200, merchant is at the very bottom because A, you really only need to use a merchant once or twice in a run, and B, merchants should only be used if necessary before day 200 if you feel your run is not really going that well and you need to start spending gold to go and flesh out your dungeon, etc., stuff like that. I personally try to save my gold as long as possible, stave off the merchant as long as possible, so that way that when day 200 comes, that's when the run starts picking up and you need to ensure yourself that the rest of the run is going to go fine. You're not going to die to any randomness. I need all of the gold necessary and decision making necessary at that point to go ahead and buy what I need to buy and do what I need to do. If I spend all my gold early and blow it all off, not only do I not get the most efficient returns for my gold spent, but then I won't have any gold later to spend just in case I need to patch up holes in my build. So that's why I said the merchant is as least necessary in your run. Do not use it before day 20 and blow all your gold for no reason, okay? It really isn't worth it. So let's move on to the next list after day 200. So once again, if you haven't visited the merchant before day 200, now it becomes your priority. You need to visit the merchant at least once from day 200 to, realistically speaking, day 300, I would say. Visit them once. Go ahead and buy what you need to buy. Lay out your floor plan, etc., stuff like that. Do what you need to do. Treasure chests are second again. Very obvious. You get a random relic. Grab it if you need to. Third in the list is battle cards. Obviously, you need to flesh out your dungeon. You need to keep on grinding. You can't get lazy. Okay, the monsters you kept on day 160 are not going to survive on day 280. Okay, so you need to keep grinding. You need to keep upgrading your rooms and your monsters. Elite battles have taken a step back now because after day 200, I am going to assume you're at the 50 to 60 relic range. And for most intents and purposes, you should have enough to get you through the rest of the run. I'd rather have you fight more battles and systematically upgrade your dungeon without the random chance of you running into an elite battle that's going to kill you. As the difficulty level increases, heroes get random buffs. That means that some of the elite battles are actually harder than the boss battles. You might get an all angel elite spawn with Gigantify and acceleration. You're screwed when you get that. You're done. It's game over. I don't care if you have Floria and Tanya and you have the best bodyguards in the game. You get an all angel spawn with like acceleration and Gigantify, it's game over, okay? And that can happen to you, so you don't want that to happen to you, all right? That's why I say start avoiding elite battles, but you should still be able to handle yourself. Don't be too afraid of them after day 200. But after day 260, after day 280, I really would shy away from elite battles at that point in time. Play it safe, keep grinding away with the regular battles, and skip days as necessary. Which move on to my next point, dungeons. Dungeons now have a very low priority because all of your monsters, by one way or another, are either going to be buffed up, have themselves enhanced, either by using the merchant or some other form. And also, your rooms at this point in time should be upgraded by pure force of upgrading every time you reach a day 19, right? Like every day 19, like 39, 59, etc., stuff like that, you're going to access a dungeon card anyway. So at this point in time, dungeon cards should only really be used for skipping or an emergency heal. Which brings me down to the next thing. The last thing is events. Now at this point of the game, after day 200, you're pretty much either have hit every event, or events are going to be more detrimental to you than beneficial. And why is that? Some events do scale off of health, meaning that it requires more health to sacrifice to use that event. On some dungeon lords like Floria, this is nonsense. Who cares? She regenerates like 1,000 HP a second anyway. Other dungeon lords, it can be highly detrimental. Like if you're playing a Lilith run, taking 600 HP from her could be very huge. She can accidentally die on the next day. Also, events aren't really that strong anymore after a certain day because either your monsters are self-sustaining or they can be more detrimental if you choose them. Like if you get that nasty pyramid, that can be a bad thing. And if you choose to get the altar for whatever reason, that can be suicidal. I never advise doing that. So that is something to consider, and keep your events at the bottom of the list. That being said, they are excellent skip cards. Use them if you want to start skipping days, especially as I recommended earlier in the D340 run plan. If you're reaching day 321, go and start using events to just skip days and get to the end as quickly as possible. And the final thing that I will mention is that you want to go ahead and hit up fortune cards as you see fit whenever you have excess gold, and you want to go ahead and switch out the abilities of your bodyguards or your dungeon lord. This can either be for the next run that you're going to do, or if your current dungeon lord, if for whatever reason you just spammed her with weak monsters, in other words, monsters that had good levels but weak abilities, and she has a bunch of crap abilities on her, like a bunch of C ranks or B ranks, go ahead and hit a fortune teller card and then go ahead and change those on her so that way she has better abilities and she can survive a little bit longer. All right, and that is that for the Fate Selection Priorities list. All right, guys, this leads us to the last portion of our guide. This is what I have labeled important notes. Now, I wanted to treat this section of the guide like a FAQ, meaning that there might be questions that you run into that you want answers to while you're making a guide or you're doing a day 340 run. And since I'm not able to help you directly, I decided to make this list to hopefully answer any questions that may pop up. At least these were the questions that popped up in my head and I decided to answer them and then list them here, so that way you guys can use it as a reference. I don't want to read through this entire guide verbatim because it's kind of self-explanatory. It is kind of like an FAQ anyway, but I will go ahead and choose a couple that I think are worth mentioning, so that way I can go ahead and seed a couple of ideas in your head from the get-go as you're doing your day 340 run, and especially if you are following my guide. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Remember, you can access this at any time. The first point is very important. Okay, Dungeon Lord choice is purely optional in this build, namely my build, but using Floria or Tanya will make it a lot easier. The purpose of this guide is for strictly reaching day 340 on any difficulty and not trying for other achievements. I cannot stress this enough. We are trying to get to day 340. We're not trying to do other achievements. We're not trying to role play. We're not trying to make our waifu our favorite waifu and let the world know that, oh, you know, Elizabeth is the best dungeon lord ever because she's a vampire and she's really sexy and I like stockings. That's cool. Cool story, bro. I love it. I want you to write the fanfic. That's not what this guide is for. This guide is for min-maxing and getting to day 340, so that way you can unlock the achievement. So that way you can go buy more things at the Abyss store and then go back and play Elizabeth with all the fun toys that she now has. And then you can go and do a 340 run with Elizabeth in a lot easier fashion because you used Tanya or Floria to go ahead and get you there, okay? Consider Floria or Tanya the OP as of build 1062. I don't think that's even an argument. I don't think the leaderboards argue my point either, okay? But that's one of those things I want to go ahead and throw out there. Now, this leads on to the next point. The more Abyss Store unlocks you have, the easier the guide will be. This should be fairly obvious. If for whatever reason you just picked up the game 2 days ago and you barely made it to day 100 and now you're thinking, okay, I'm going to make it to day 340 because that's who I am. I live raw like that. Sure, this guide is going to help you, but I mean, if you're going to start the run with no bodyguards, you're going to start the run with no facility succession, you're going to start the run with no monster succession, like literally you're starting a day 340 run with Lilith and 3 slimes, chances are you're going to fail and you're going to get frustrated. And I don't want you to get frustrated. I just want to let you guys know that the more Abyss Stories unlocks you have, the easier the run will be. And this is especially important for those of you who are doing day 340 runs on a harder difficulty level. If you're able to do a day 340 run on difficulty level 1 and 2, but you're struggling on day 7, chances are it's just because you don't have enough Abyss Store unlocks. There are just some things that you need to unlock first to make your run that much easier, okay? Because, like I said, certain monsters are just way overpowered. They're way better. Certain relics are just really, really good to have, and they synergize with your Dungeon Lord's abilities. You want to go and get those unlocked as soon as possible, okay? For those of you who are starting off, remember that facility succession, monster succession, and I couldn't list it here because I think it's fairly obvious at this point in time, bodyguards are of your top priority to unlock first and foremost when you're doing a D340 run, okay? Now, the next couple of points are more technical, and those are things that I think you guys should focus on as you're doing your run. What I'll move on to is this one right here, all the way down here, okay? So a day 340 run should be more a test of patience than difficulty. I can't stress this enough. If you're playing your cards right and you're doing everything you need to do, it's really more boring and tedious to do a day 340 run than it should be difficult. When you were first starting off this game, Dungeon Maker specifically, and you didn't know what you were doing and everything was new and fresh, it was really frustrating to survive to day 60. It was really frustrating to survive to day 100, and when you did, you felt a big relief, right? Well, now that you know what you're doing and you've gone through the motions over and over again, chances are it's going to become very easy and you're going to know what to do. And that being said, day 340 should just be tedious, not hard. If it is hard, something is wrong. Okay, I don't know what is wrong, but something is wrong. Okay, which leads me on to my next point. By day 200, if you feel the run is going nowhere and you feel you're spinning your wheels and you're feeling that it's hard as it is at like day 180, you're like, man, this is frustrating. I am barely alive. My Dungeon Lord has like 17 HP. My monsters are dying left and right. What's going on? You need to reevaluate your build and what you're doing, because it's much faster to reset at day 200. Go ahead and get that experience point. Go ahead and get those rebirth stones in so you can unlock more stuff to the Abyss Store. It's much faster to restart at day 200 than it is to struggle from day 200 all the way up to day 340, even if you can make it that far, okay? That's going to be really frustrating. You're going to start pulling your hair out. You're going to start wondering, what am I doing wrong? And you're not really going to get any benefit out of it other than just being really upset at why everything you're doing doesn't seem to work at this point in time. At its core, Dungeon Maker is an RNG game. At its core, it is a roguelike. So some things are just not going to plan out well. Okay, so day 200, I should say. Things aren't looking well. Reset, try again. Okay, that's the nature of the beast. Now, the next point after that, day 321, you are now almost there. At day 321, don't get lazy, but at the same time, don't take risks. Play it safe. Remember, we're trying to hit day 340. We're not trying to get the best score. We're not trying to do anything else. Start skipping days at day 321. Okay, hit as many dungeons, events, and fortune teller cards as you can, and skip those days. When you have to engage in a battle, do so with a regular battle. Okay, don't fight elite battles. Do whatever it takes to go ahead and get you to day essentially 339, because once you're there, you're now done with the run. Once you hit 340, regardless if you survive the Angel Onslaught, it doesn't matter because you're done with the run. You'll get the achievement, and you can go ahead and reset and try the next difficulty level or do it again. All right. I already mentioned this about the difficulty level increase, so you need more Abyss Door unlocks. So I'll go ahead and skip to the final 3 points. Sometimes you will randomly fail on a boss room with no fault of your own. This is due to the RNG nature of the game. Sometimes they'll give you an elite battle, for example, with angels and acceleration and gigantify. You just have to shrug your shoulders. It's life. Don't get mad. Reset. Okay? It just happens. I don't know why it happens. Sometimes it happens. Don't worry about it, okay? Having a calm mind about things will help you access the game in a better fashion. Which leads me on to this particular point, because I know some of you out there are creepers. Some of you out there are sneaking by, and I see you. Don't think I don't see you. Some of you out there haven't even reached day 100. Some of you out there who are looking at this guy and listening to me right now haven't even gotten to like difficulty level 3 day 100. Okay? Some of you out there are basically guessing what works, and you're either following my guide or someone else's guide verbatim with your fingers crossed, hoping that it all works out for the best. Okay? You cannot do this on a day 340 run, especially at harder difficulty levels. If you don't know the mechanics of the game, you have no idea what you're doing, don't be ashamed. No one's putting you down. This is a single player game. This isn't a competition. Go back, play it more often, get more experience for your Dungeon Lord, get more experience in the game, unlock more stuff in the Abyss Store, the things I recommended in the Pre-Requisite, and then go ahead and understand the game's mechanics inside and out. Because once you do so, it's going to be really easy, and you probably won't even need this plan. Like I said, this plan is more of a second opinion. It's not even a real guide. It's really just for people who are already doing day 340 runs anyway, but they just want to optimize their build or something like that. They just want someone else to chime in on what they're thinking. This is what this guide really is for, not for people who are just brand new to the game and they're trying to go on gung-ho when they're playing, you know, a Lilith at level 4 and they have no idea what they're doing. Okay, so please don't do that. Guessing will ultimately lead to frustration down the road, believe me. Okay, and then the final thing that I want to emphasize, this is all there's really no friendly way of putting this, so I'll just go and throw it out there. This is for all the elitists and for people who skip to like the end of the video for whatever reason, because they have a chip on their shoulder, they had a bad day at work, you know, they went to their favorite restaurant and they got their order wrong, they stepped on a tack, you know, their cat or dog bit them this morning. I don't know why they're having a bad day. They went on the internet, they saw this guide, they wanted to take it out on me or anyone else that wrote a guide. Whatever it is, remember, I wrote this guide as a day 340 guide. This is not the best guide on the internet. This is not a day 500, a day 1000, highest leaderboard score guide. This is not the elite, check out my dungeon 8000, best in the world guide. I'm better than any Japanese, Korean, Indonesian, South African, Italian, Swedish, Sweden, whatever country I haven't mentioned. I'm better than all these players in the entire world because I follow this guide and I wrote this guide. You should be like me. This is not the point of this guide. The point of this guide is to only do one thing and one thing only, and that's reach day 340. And I did it in the most structured way I thought possible, and I did it with as many references I thought possible, and that is it. If you want to go ahead and make a guide yourself, please do so. If you want to make a guide that you think that can expand on my guide, please do so. And if you think that you can make a guide that will allow players to get up to day 500, 1,000, 8,000, 700, 20,000, pi, infinity, whatever, feel free to do so. I encourage you. Let me know. I'll link it. I will link it in this guide, and I'll say if you're ready to get to the next step, please check out XYZ's guide. That'll get you to day infinity and beyond, okay? Because that's cool. I encourage other people to make guides. I encourage people to talk about the game because I think it's a fantastic game. It's really fun. But this is not a guide for elitists. It's not a guide for those people who are angry at the world for some reason and they need to take it on other people. This is just a guide to D340, nothing more, nothing else, and it's also a secondary opinion. And that is it, okay? All right. So let's go ahead and close it out on a positive note. A very nice person, NyanPass, made a forum post and is currently maintaining it over at TouchArcade.com. I have linked it in the video. I've also linked it in this guide. Feel free to visit NyanPass. Send him or her, I'm not sure his sex or gender, unfortunately, but feel free to send NyanPass a word of thank you for making the guide, and feel free to read through that forum post because there's a lot of information from a lot of other talented, intelligent players, okay? They have guides themselves. They just don't have the time to go and make an insane YouTube video like I have, but they're very smart people, and I've learned from them as well, okay? So feel free to visit this forum right here. Here's a link in the guide. It's also in the YouTube description. It's also on my website. Hit them up, and that is that. All right. So I hope this day 340 run guide was useful for you guys. Remember that I'm going to go ahead and keep it updated. It will be automatically updated. I will reach a point where I feel that I need to change some things dramatically. If I do so, I will go ahead and add an extra tab that says updates or radical changes to the guide rather than recording an entire new video, because this takes a lot of energy and effort, and obviously I don't have time for that. Neither do you, to go and rewatch a new video which practically has the same information, okay? But go ahead and click on that tab when a new version or new build comes out, and I'll go and list any particular guides. Who knows? Maybe like Rebecca is going to be the new meta in build like 10083, right? I don't know. Maybe they buffed Corpse Explosion and suddenly she's like the meta now. So taking her over Tanya and Floria might be better. Maybe they nerf Floria and Tanya. We don't know. That's what I'm talking about. Please check that tab when I do create it for updates to the guide. So I'm going to go and end this video with some shout outs to myself. I am sponsored by myself. I am boxinacorner.net, specifically Tree from boxinacorner.net. Feel free to hit me up on my website, contact me via my email, or just go and leave a comment on the website. I do appreciate it. I do play other games. I do other things. You can see that on the website. And if you like this video, feel free to share it with other folks. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't like it for whatever reason, that's okay. Thanks for stopping by anyway. I hope you got some information out of it. And if you have any questions on the game, feel free to ask me. And if I can't answer your questions or I'm missing an action, maybe I fall into the pit of Sarlacc somewhere because I'm on another planet or something like that, and you don't get a response in a timely fashion, feel free to, remember, go to this forum at TouchArcade and hit up the users there. They might have an answer to your question quicker than I will. All right? That's that, guys. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a good day, noon, or night, wherever you happen to be. And I will see you guys in my next YouTube video, whatever it happens to be. Take care of yourselves.